Hey everybody, welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be all about gearing. What the heck are they? How do you use them? When do you use them? Why are there so many? So today we're going to be talking all about gearing, and hopefully by the time we're done with this video, you will be a gear master. You will have mastered your gear. You will know everything there is to know about how to use your gears for shifting, how to maximize your cadence because you're shifting properly. One of the things that happens is people are riding along and they are feeling like, you know what, I feel like I'm pedaling, but I'm not going anywhere, or I'm pedaling and it just feels too hard. I'm burning my legs out. Well, a lot of that has to do with you understanding how to use the gearing that your bike has and when to shift and why you should shift. I have most of the components here that make up your drivetrain with the exception of a chain. We'll just imagine what a chain looks like. But the first thing we got to do is we got to talk about gearing and labeling. Most people today, you're either running a 9-speed, a 10-speed, or an 11-speed. Few people are starting to run 12 speeds. In the front of your bike, you have something called a chain ring, or a chain set, or a crank set. Okay, this is what one looks like. Some of these have 3 gears in the front. Okay, they're called a triple. Some of them have only 1 gear in the front. They're called a 1-by, but most of them have 2 gears in the front, and it's called a traditional crank set, okay, or a double. Now, these come in different sizes. You have, like what I'm holding here in my hand, this is called a compact. It has a 50-34. Then there's something called a mid-compact. A mid-compact would have a 52-36. Then you have a standard. A standard would have 53-39. What do those numbers mean, Louis? Well, the numbers have to do with the amount of teeth that are on each one of these chain rings. These little oval, circular things are called the chain rings, okay? So this chain ring has, if you were to count them, you'd see it has 50 teeth. The smaller one, the one on the inside, this one has 34 teeth. What is the significance of that? Well, if you are riding, okay, and you're turning your bike and you're going around at 80 RPM, you're doing 80 RPM, this thing is spinning at 80 revolutions per minute. If the chain is in the bigger chain ring, meaning if it's in the 50 and you're turning 80 RPM, the chain will be pulled faster than it will be pulled if it's in the 34, okay? What does that mean? It means that it gives you more leverage, more power going towards the rear wheel, but please understand that pulling the chain faster is going to create more resistance because you're still dealing with physics, okay? Typically, 53-39 is kind of used for flat areas like here in South Florida. 50-34 is for hilly areas, and then 52-36 mid-compact is kind of like that compromise between the two, okay? Then in the back, we have the cassette cogs. You'll hear people say, man, I'm running a 50-34 and a 12-27. Those numbers have to do with what they call the cogs in the back, your cassette. They call the cassette cogs. And those numbers have to do with the number of teeth that are on these little plates, which we're going to call them your gear cogs. That's basically what they are. So on the small one, this is the smallest one. We have this, for example, this is an 11-25, and it happens to also be an 11 speed. An 11 speed because there's 11 of these cassette cogs. The smallest one has 11 teeth, 12 teeth, 13 teeth, 14 teeth, 15 teeth, etc., and it goes up, not necessarily 100% in increments by one, not necessarily it skips a couple, but it goes all the way up until we get to 25. We have 21, 23, 25. What does that mean? For that same 80 RPM and the chain is on the 25, it's going to feel easier to your legs, but it's going to move you slower than if you're on 11. So when the chain is on the biggest cog in the back, it's going to create less resistance and move you slower than when it's on the smallest cog in the back. Okay, so we usually use the smaller cogs to generate more speed, and we usually use the larger cogs for dealing with the wind or when we're climbing, etc. That's basically how your drivetrain works. Now, how do you go, or how do you use these things? When do you use one? When do you use the other? The simplest way that we can designate these is to say when we first start riding and we're just warming up, we're kind of just getting going, you might want to be in the smaller one. You'll be spinning a lot, but it's a way to kind of like get your lungs opened up, get your heart rate going a little bit, because you'll be spinning a lot. But if you're on the flats and the speed starts picking up, you want to go into the larger chain ring. So you'll be in a larger chain ring, pulling at 80 RPM. You'll be pulling that chain faster and creating more resistance than if you're here. So you're pulling along, okay, creating more resistance, being able to generate more power. But then in the flats, you start using the different gears to affect the tension that you feel in your legs and the chain and the speed that you're having so that you can go along with the group, okay? So let's say you're riding along in the large chain ring and all of a sudden you hit a hill, okay? And you wanna make sure that you get up the hill without straining your legs, without cramping up or anything like that. Well, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go from the large chain ring to the small chain ring. And in order to do that, on your bike, you have something called a derailleur. This happens to be a front derailleur. The front derailleur sits right above the chain ring, kind of like here. And what it does is it moves the chain from the large chain ring to the small chain ring. The front derailleur is activated by your left brifter, okay? So you would click down or click across to move the chain from the small chain ring to the large chain ring and vice versa. The cable goes through here and it just pulls, it actuates this thing by pulling it, and it just moves slightly, but it moves enough to move the chain from the large chain ring to the small chain ring and vice versa. And then in the back, you have what's called a rear derailleur, and a rear derailleur sits attached to the back of the bike right there. Hopefully you could see that. And when you use the right brifter and you actuate the gears by the levers, there's this cable that runs from the front of the bike, runs all the way through your frame to the back of the bike, and that cable goes through a little channel here, and when that cable is pulled, it moves this parallelogram kind of like this. So this part isn't moving, this part is attached to the frame. It moves this part out or inwards that way, and that allows the chain to go from the small rings in the back to the larger rings, okay? So again, when you're riding along, the smaller cogs in the back are going to give you more speed but more resistance. The larger cogs in the back are going to give you less speed, less resistance. Again, ideal for climbing, dealing with wind, and things like that, okay? Now, when should you shift? Why should you shift? Why are there so many gears on my bike? Do I need all of them? Yeah, I think you do. You should shift when the terrain changes. or if it starts getting windy, or if you start, you know, feeling a little bit labored, you should shift. I don't necessarily know if being labored and dealing with things would necessarily mean that you need to go from the large chain ring to the small chain ring. But certainly if you start going like I'm riding on the flats and now all of a sudden I'm climbing, you're definitely going to need to go from the large chain ring to the small chain ring. Now, here's how I deal with shifting. I lived in Georgia for a while. We had a lot of, we had mountains, but where I lived, we had a lot of rolling hills. We had a lot of very steep climbs. They weren't super long, but they necessitated me going from pedaling along on the flats or false flats to all of a sudden, boom, I'm climbing. The way that I would do it is if I'm riding along on the large chain ring and I hit a hill and I need to shift into the small chain ring, I would go ahead and shift from the large chain ring to the small chain ring. Okay, got that? So I'm riding along, I hit a hill, I'd go click, click, and I would go from the large chain ring to the small chain ring. I would immediately go from the 23 to the 21 to the 19. Meaning, if I just shifted, I would go click, click. The reason I did that is because I didn't want to go from doing this to doing this. There's no reason to do, I call that drivetrain shock. And then what would happen is if I shifted and that wasn't enough to help me get up the climb, I would keep shifting up until I found a gear that was comfortable with the cadence that I wanted to use. Conversely, you go from the small chain ring into the big chain ring, move up in the other direction 2 times. Make the necessary adjustments as you go with your pedaling, but that's just a basic guideline for you to have in terms of shifting, when to shift, riding smoothly. Again, like I said, nobody can really tell you when to shift, how to shift, why you shift. I suggest that you get out there, first of all, put the bike in a big chain ring, ride around someplace where it's kind of like flat, or at least you don't have too many steep hills, and play around with shifting the gears in the back, using the right lever. Okay? Get a feel for what shifting at different times, at different RPMs, at different cadences will do for you. And then when you get an opportunity, you start doing some climbing, put the bike in the small chain ring, start shifting. You're going to be in a higher part of the cassette, obviously, but start doing some shifting just to see what that feels like. Okay. All right, guys, like I said, more information than anybody could ever use, need, have any use for, or benefit from in terms of understanding your gearing, the importance of keeping a consistent cadence, keeping proper tension on your chain, not exhibiting too much of what I call drivetrain shock, and being able to be smooth throughout the gear ranges. You got to practice it, but hopefully the information and understanding what all those numbers, meaning the number of teeth, mean, helps you with being able to orientate yourself to being able to master your gears. Master your gears. Okay, thanks again for watching, guys. Big like, please share, subscribe if you find the information beneficial. So as usual, our focus here is to help build a better cycling community by instructing, informing, and inspiring. Thanks again for watching, guys. Be blessed.